Hi, everyone. Welcome back to our Sunday talk within the Nine-Sided Circle. I'm your host, Noor Kyle.
And I'm her loyal sidekick, Mushtaq Ali.
We're finally getting this down. So, thank you so much for joining us, whether you're here live or watching on the replay. We're very happy to have you here. And of course, we need to do our brief YouTube spiel so that our channel continues to survive and thrive in this weird internet hellscape that we have going today. So, the ways that you can support us, of course, you can like and
Yeah, like this
comment on
video.
this
We would
video.
love it if you like this video.
Yeah,
Subscribe to our channel.
yes, that helps us out a lot.
Yeah. Leave a comment. We love your comments. We've gotten some great comments lately.
We have some very thoughtful ones. Thank you for those.
Yeah. And send us money.
Yes, we do accept donations. We have our PayPal and our coffee links in our description. And if you're interested in a one-on-one or a two-on-one with both me and Mushtaq, you can send us an email or a private message on Facebook. Either of those ways of contacting us work. And you can join our Facebook group and our email list. The
Yeah, you'll
last
like our
I
Facebook group.
certainly recommend because that's the way you're going to be able to keep in touch with us no matter what happens to Facebook, YouTube, or you get banned on Facebook. Who knows what crazy things happen these days? That's the way to reach us best, and we will make sure to respond to you as soon as we can. Other than that, share our stuff if you like it. That helps out a lot too.
Yeah, share our stuff if you hate it.
And someone mentioned our t-shirts recently.
Yes.
If you're interested in those, you can buy one. We do not ship them out ourselves. We have one of those t-shirt creation websites that does it for us, so we can't really answer any questions about taxes or anything like that, unfortunately. But that is something that is out there in the world for you to purchase and
And
wear.
it's a pretty cool t-shirt. And it
Yeah,
doesn't even have our name on it, so you can wear it anywhere.
and it's pretty comfy too. So,
Yeah.
because we each have one of our own that we purchased. All right, without further ado, let's get to the topic at hand.
What is
And
the topic at hand?
the topic at hand is the inner story, as well as its relationship to hypnotic trance induction. But we talk about story a lot in this space, so we want to elaborate on what we mean by that. Because if you understand what we mean by story, then as far as I'm concerned, I think many of the other things we talk about in relation to quote unquote waking up or quote unquote being asleep, uh, doing the work, all of those things are really about our relationship to the stories that we hold in life. And often those stories are not necessarily immediately apparent to us. So we're going to be talking about that this evening and how those stories tend to run our lives without us realizing. So, where shall we begin, Mushtaq? Now that I've
Um,
given you a whole.
you have made the entrance possible. So, I was born and raised in New Mexico, which for many reasons is a wonderful thing. Prettiest state in the union, best food for regional cuisine that you'll ever find, uh, prettiest skies. And if you're a rural kid like I was, you have a possibility of interacting with at least a couple of the native nations there. So one of the native peoples that I got to hang out a lot with was the Navajo. And because I developed a business with two Navajo boys, the Begay brothers. And so I got occasionally invited to ceremonies that were open to everyone, or at least to friends. And I learned something very, very interesting. Navajo healers have a very specific way of healing. They aren't shamans in the actual definition of what a shaman is, though we seem to like to refer to everybody as a shaman these days. They might feel that this was an inappropriate title. The Navajo word hatali is translated as a singer, and what they are is a sacred storyteller. The healing ceremony, which can last for 6 days, 7 days, is taken from their creation myth. I use myth in a general term for those folks. It's as real as any of our creation stories are for us. But their model for healing is, if you get out of balance from this story, you no longer fit. And that fitting creates an internal conflict within you that does not allow you to heal correctly from any shock or illness. So what the ceremony does is it takes you through the section of the creation myth that repatterns your consciousness to align with that part of the story again. And this is, you see this in all of their ceremonies. Probably one of the most famous was after World War II. A lot of Navajo boys fought in World War II, and they came back and they suffered from what was then called shell shock. And now we know it as PTSD. And so the healers of the tribe, which is a huge tribe, so there were a fair number of them, got together and discussed what they should do, and they revived a ceremony called the Enemy Way, which they had not done in a generation. And the Enemy Way was specifically instructions on how somebody who had been contaminated by fighting was reintroduced into the culture of the tribe and reaccepted as one of the people. And I will tell you that it had a better result than any psychiatric treatment you will ever find. And it was used again in Korea, and it was used again in Vietnam. I'm sure it's being used today on the soldiers that have returned from Iraq and Afghanistan and every other place that we send people to get shot up. And this is a very powerful thing. And so what the healer does is to put perfect story back inside the person, taking away the story that they created about being shot at and being ostracized from the people and all of this stuff, recreating the original story and repatterning the person to fit to it. Now, some years after this, I studied hypnosis, and specifically the hypnosis of Milton Erickson. And he had a pattern that he used, and he wrote it out. There's actually a book about this now that has the transcript to the first one of these trances that he did, and commentary by one of his proteges on what was actually going on. And it's called The February Man. And this was based on a woman who had a really crappy upbringing. And she did not understand how to be a good parent. And her family suffered from it. She suffered from it. And she went to Dr. Erickson to see if she could get any help. He did deep trance age regressions on her and took her back, I think, over a number of times to various parts in her life as a child. And then he would show up in the trance as himself, wise old doctor who would like sit next to her on a bench and talk with her and give her the kind of support that she felt that she had needed and was lacking. And he did this at various periods through her life on up to her adulthood. Interestingly enough, It worked. She completely changed because she had a new internal story. Now, this is based on the idea that all of us have an internal story that we tell ourselves all the time, and it changes as we go through life to a certain extent. But there are some fundamentals that don't seem to change, at least not much at all. From a Sufi point of view, we would say these are the ghosts that we carry with us in the Alam al Arwah, the realm of spirits. And we can listen to the stories of the ghosts in our head. The thing is that these stories that we tell ourselves can change. They can change accidentally, and they can change consciously. And more importantly for us, they don't have to just change. For stories that are no longer useful, you can stop telling yourself those stories. And Adyashanti has this great quote that I put in our description, which is, no story, no suffering. Does this make sense so far?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, anybody think I'm completely full of it, which is okay.
Any questions so far?
I could use an example or two of stories.
Of what? An example or two of what? You broke up.
Yeah. I mean, of a typical story somebody would be telling themselves.
I will never get anywhere in this life. I know I'll never get anywhere because I watched my father and he never got anywhere in this life. He stayed a poor man his whole life. His dreams were never realized. My dreams will never be realized. Like that. That's a story that is not all that uncommon. The thing is, though, that it tends to be slightly subliminal.
Yeah,
And you should know this, Nancy, because you've got these stories and we've talked about them.
Oh, I guess they're not coming as clear as is needed,
Okay, well, I'm not
but
going to bring them up because that you told me about this in confidence. So
sure.
we can talk about this the next time we talk.
Yeah, this Friday. Yeah.
Yeah. And so everybody has these. Who here is in touch with some of their story? Who would feel comfortable speaking about it? Todd.
do you,
Not comfortable talking about it.
okay,
Okay, don't mention it. James,
sorta.
sorta. Anyone?
Sorry.
Go
I
ahead.
can see how my stories, how they were conditioned into me and how they limit me. I don't really want to go into detail, but these stories were accumulated in times of high stress, high fear, whatever, and lead to a pessimistic way of interpreting the world. Even though I know it's bullshit, the story carries a real charge with it that can be very intimidating.
Okay. Now here's the thing. The stories don't have to be bad. I have a story that says I can learn anything. Let me tell you the story of me, the guy who can learn anything. Since I was in my earliest childhood, I remember being able to pick something up and figure out how to do it within a day. I taught myself to bead. I taught myself to carve wood. I taught myself to carve stone. I taught myself how to code. I taught myself how to use programs that most people have to go to school to learn. Um, that's part of my story. And I'm not usually saying that to myself out loud in my head, but the knowledge that this is the story, this is me, is true, and it informs everything that I do. So stories can be good as well as bad, and they can be neutral. I like cherry pie. I think that cherry pie is one of the finest pies ever made upon the face of God's green earth. That's also a story. And unless you find yourself having to eat cherry pie every day, then it's neither good nor bad.
And is it true? I mean, there's probably a pie out there that you would taste and be like, okay, all cherry pie except this one.
Yeah, probably. But the story is that I like cherry
Exactly.
pie.
Yeah, yeah.
Are
And
you
you have
going
to
to
go ahead, Todd.
are you going to invoke Sir Terry Pratchett at some point?
I just
story.
may, because he, especially in his dealings with Tiffany Aching, has a lot to say about stories. I did invoke Kvothe, though.
From The Name of the Wind by Patrick Rothfuss. Yep.
I can relate to your feeling of I can learn anything, or I can learn to do anything from a slightly different perspective. Certainly when I was much younger, I had that kind of feeling. And it's a little interesting because as I've grown older, particularly in recent years, I've realized that that really is not happening in any way. But there was another story fragment that I was going to throw into the mix, which is my father was a bandmaster in the Royal Marines. And one of the things that I remember him telling me a few times was that he never wanted he could have taken the office some kind of officer's exam and become an officer, but for some reason he didn't want to, and I can't quite remember at this point whether it was because he didn't think he could do it or because he didn't want to do it. But I've remembered that story in some ways has kind of influenced me, because I had opportunities to go into management as opposed to remaining in a technical capacity. And I never wanted to. And I've noticed that there's kind of an interesting parallel there.
Yeah, oftentimes that's the case. We learn a lot of our stories from our parents. We learn our stories from our religions. We learn our stories from our cultural interaction. And it's very interesting because different stratas of society have different cultural stories that make life completely different. I grew up very, very poor. And so I was surrounded as a child by poor people's stories. And then at one point in my life, I became very, very rich. We're talking 7 figures rich. We're talking living in, George Lucas was my nearest neighbor rich. And I had to give up my childhood stories. Otherwise, they would have completely sabotaged me. I had to recreate a story that says, of course I can have wealth. And after I did that, I realized I don't even want this shit, and left it all behind, but that's a different story. Now, this is the lowest level of talking about this. Stories that shape our lives at a nearly unconscious level, the things that we tell ourselves. The whole point of self-observation is to begin to see what these stories are, to hear ourselves tell ourselves these stories. The highest level of this is to learn to put stories away. You don't necessarily want to destroy a story, but you don't need to have it running your life all the time. And this is where no story, no suffering comes in. The highest level of having a story, and I'm pretty sure if you want to function in the world, you need some sort of a story, is to put on the story when you need it and take it off when you don't, and never, never, ever identify with it. Because identification with the story is what allows you to go to sleep. The story that you tell yourself can be modeled as if it were literally a trance induction. And it helps you to stay in your everyday somnambulism. The way out is see the story, hear the story that you're telling yourself, and realize that it's a story and that it is separate from you as a being. When you can do that, you have the ability to put that story away. Go, oh, I don't need to tell myself this. And you'll have to watch. You have to do the self-observation so you can catch yourself telling yourself that story and then stop. Catch yourself doing it and then stop. Until you break the habit of telling yourself that story. You don't destroy the story. You don't get rid of it. You don't want to get rid of it because there has to be some time or another when it might be useful. But you no longer want to tell yourself that story unconsciously. Does this make sense so far?
Yes.
Yeah, lots of heads nodding yes. It brings to mind, you know how you were saying you're not trying to get rid of the story.
No.
Two things now come to mind. And I definitely don't want to pull us into tangents exactly, but I just want
We're going
to
to go there anyway, so knock yourself out.
okay. Two things is one thing they talk about in just like mainstream psychotherapy, for example, we all develop coping strategies and ways that we coped with something at a time when we were perhaps young and inexperienced, and we always are told, we did the best we could at that time with the tools that we had. And these stories can be those tools. They can serve that purpose.
They are.
Yeah. So as you were saying, it's not that we throw them away. We can acknowledge that they have served a purpose. It's just that they don't need to be the only tool in the toolkit.
Yeah.
And we don't need to be chronically immersed in the experience of the story, because often it's from a time past. And the other thread, similarly, is we also talk about the ego. And we talk about how the ego serves a purpose. We're not looking to kill the ego. We're just looking to give it its rightful job. And that's to kind of, do the things that our body requires mechanically, like breathing and digesting food and noticing the subtleties of danger that come up spontaneously, as opposed to getting stuck in things that are not happening in the now. And that tends to be the job that we give the ego, which is not appropriate for it. So I think of working with story as similar to that.
Yeah. Your ego's job, in part, is to select the appropriate story for you when you have a task to do or an event to deal with. For instance, when I'm about to learn something new, my ego will say to me, hey, you remember this time when you had to learn this really hard thing? Remember the time that you had to learn to use Adobe Photoshop and all you had was the manual, nothing else. There was nobody to help you, and you went through that manual and you taught yourself how to do Photoshop, and 3 months later you were making big money doing Photoshop. That's the kind of person you are, so you can do this. And then once I've done it, the ego goes, okay, we'll put that story away now. You don't need to be listening to it anymore. It'll just make your ego swell. Quit it. Be humble.
Yep, it's there when you need it. It's not taking up space when you don't.
And you don't identify with it. This can be a problem too, because if you don't take control of your stories, somebody else will. Speaking of Terry Pratchett said, the trouble with having an open mind is that there are all these people who want to put something in it for you. And what they usually want to put in it is some sort of story that is maybe more beneficial to them than you. For example, Milton Erickson created the February Man. Decades later, some vile piece of garbage created a pattern called the October Man. And it was based on the February Man pattern. But this guy was a member of what is euphemistically known as the pickup artist community. And the October Man was a pattern that you could instill in somebody through story that would basically make them utterly dependent on you. It was vile. And in the hands of somebody who knows what they're doing, it will work. I had a client come to me who had been the subject of this particular pattern, and cleaning it up was a chore. So this is another reason why we want to know about how stories work in ourselves, and to be doing some story hygiene from time to time.
That's a great word. That's what came to my mind too, is this sounds like internal hygiene.
Yeah.
And
Ed has
that's
been
exactly
very
what it is.
patiently waiting
Yes.
with his hand up. So before I go blathering off on another tangent, tell us, Ed.
What I find is that once I become aware of that story, one or two times observing it, the effect that it has over me, it just drops. And then when I'm in that situation again, the story doesn't come up. My reactions are not there anymore. And I'm just either neutral, or I can take it any place that I want to take it.
I'm assuming you're speaking specifically of negative stories.
Yes, negatives. Thank you. Negative stories.
Because for the stories that are positive, why get rid of them? Just tame them.
Yes.
So another area. Osama,
Yeah,
what do you
Osama.
think?
I keep muting myself.
Don't mute yourself.
Well, number one, two things. Yeah. So the first is, as you're speaking, in my head, I'm like, wait a second, positive stories. What the heck is that? I'm trying to find a positive story. I'm feeling left out. That right. I just wanted to, to mention that. So I guess
Tell me the story. Tell me the story of your music, dude.
Yeah.
well,
Tell me about you as a musician. Can you make music?
I can.
Can you make music that people like?
Yes.
There's a story in there.
Right.
You're doing what a lot of people do. What I would say most people do is you focus on the negative.
Well, yeah. This was kind of the thing, right? Is that the gaze or the focus is mainly on what is not working, because that's the thing that I would have to really focus on and put more energy into, right? So to hear about the positive stories or the positive, positive stories and how I can pick and choose and interact with them, that's really interesting, and it broadens the idea of self-observation in those moments as well, and using that to learn and keep going. The other thing that I wanted to mention was this idea of not getting rid of the story. Like, I remember in the beginning when I started to go deeper within myself, and I'm questioning sexuality, I'm questioning my religion, questioning how both of them interact together. And for the longest time ever, it's me wanting to get rid of the story. Not until there was a moment of exhaustion, of fully surrendering and allowing a full acceptance, which is saying, okay, I'm not going to get rid of you. Matter of fact, I probably can't get rid of you. Let me accept and embrace that the work started to take shape. That I felt this boost of energy that now allowed me to, like you said, pick and choose, and at the same time, not identify. It's like, oh, okay. And the identification will come only for like external relationships, because it's language is needed. And it's the same thing with music as well. People ask me, oh, what genre is your music? And I'm like, the closest thing would probably be hip hop, right? But me internally, I don't identify with it as such. But people need language. They need to know how to interact with it. So here you go. You want a label? Take this. Oh, what's your orientation? Oh, you want a label? Here it is. Oh, what, like, it becomes that kind of relationship. So the question would be, is knowing the importance of this acceptance and hearing you now talk about the positive and the negative stories that we tell ourselves, would still, well, maybe I'm answering my own question right now. Self-observation be the way in order to, quote unquote, catch these positive stories and say, like, oh, here's one. I like that. Would that be accurate?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Thank you. That was that.
There was somebody else who had a
Yeah,
question.
thank you for sharing, Osama. That was great. And I think all of us can relate to what you're saying in some way about, these identifiers being external rather than internal. I like that. Anissa says, positive stories keep us going through the everydayness of life.
Yep.
Yeah.
So here's the thing, though. This is one of my favorite things to beat up on. Trauma therapy. There is a kind of trauma therapy that was, I don't know if it's still popular, I hope not, but it used to be, where you would go and you would relive your trauma. So you go to some shrink and they go, okay, relive your trauma for me. And you would. And they go, okay, is it better? And you go, no. Relive it again. And if you do not know what you're doing in a situation like that, you are just reinforcing the trauma over and over and over again. You are making the story stronger and more entrenched. You don't want to lose the story, because the story informs you of how not to get caught in a situation like that again. But you want to sometimes edit the story. You might have a wise old person come in and say, look, this wasn't your fault, and this is why, and here's what you can do to prevent it in the future. but you want to take the energy out of it, not pour energy into it. Todd, you had a thought?
Yes. When I started therapy for trauma, the what you were talking about was in vogue, and the therapist said that's not considered ethical anymore, but it's still done.
It's done a lot, mostly by new age types.
And also by a certain sort of therapist for the military.
Yeah.
Ugh. That sounds extra awful.
It is, but it has fortunately fallen out of vogue in the mainstream of the profession.
That's good. You see it a lot with new age guru types because it is an incredibly powerful tool of manipulation.
I will say that one therapist who I did not stay with long tried that, and pushed me to a place where the stories, nearly to a place where the story said, I have to kill this person to get out alive,
Mm.
Yeah.
which would have been a very bad surprise for him.
Yeah. And uncomfortable for you.
Mm-hmm.
So that's another reason to, if I, back in the days when I dealt with people with traumas, what I would do is drain all of the energy from the trauma, every little bit of it, and then have them put the trauma memory somewhere where if they ever needed it, they would have access, but otherwise it would not bother them. And people freak out about this when they hear it. They go, oh my God, you can't do this. That person has to suffer more. They have to always be in touch with their suffering. And no, you don't have to always be in touch with your suffering. No story, no suffering. So taking this back to the Sufi point of view.
James has a question. How do
Okay.
you drain it? How do you drain the charge out of that
Start by doing
experience?
self-remembering. After you've done enough self-remembering to where you can be clear on what the story is and have created some separation to it, let me know and I will put you in touch with somebody who can help you drain the energy out of it. I mostly don't do that kind of stuff anymore myself.
Anissa offers not identifying with it.
Yes, that is in a sense exactly correct. But the question is, what do you do instead of identifying with it? Therein lies the difference. You got to find the positives rather than the negative. Otherwise, you're just not thinking of the black cat all day long.
There's the cat.
Yep.
All the time. Yeah.
Fortunately, I like cats, so.
So you were saying the Sufi point of view.
The
on
Sufi
this.
point of view is that these stories are like the whispering of ghosts. They are things that do not actually exist. They are from the past. They died. And they are ghosts following you around. Your job is to allow yourself to be free of the identification. Because otherwise, you will think that that ghost is you, that story is you. And that's the big thing, is the story is not you. If you think that the story is you, that will pattern your life in a particular direction. I grew up on a ranch, right? I herded sheep, I herded cattle, I rode around half the day on a horse. I could have created a story that said, I'm a cowboy.
And there you'd be.
Go jingle, jangle, jingle, and I'd still be out there chasing down cattle at my old age, or I would have died falling off the horse or something. But I didn't create that story. I created a story that said, you muck out the damn stable. I'm going to the big city and getting an education. So do you see how you begin to work with this? Self-observation to discover the story. Disidentifying with the story. This is the story. This is me listening to the story. I am not the story. I am me. The story is the story. The story can be changed. That's another thing that you can do. If you're working with stories therapeutically, you change the story. And that's another thing that freaks people out, because they think, oh, no, you can't change the story because that's what happened. That's not what happened. You don't even know what happened. You're not there. It's a memory. It's just a bunch of cells firing in sequence inside your head. And that can be changed. And when you change it, the story changes. And when the story changes, your relationship to the story changes. And then your relationship to the world changes. Now, this doesn't mean you could create a story that says, I am vastly wealthy. And you wake up the next day and you still have the same amount of money in your bank account. That's just a bad story. You can create a story that says, I am actually really competent at my job and can handle it in such a way that I can increase my wealth in an ethical way. You can create that story. And over time, you will follow that story down that storyline. This is for the people who want good dreams. This is how you get the good dreams.
Yeah, I mean, that's something you could even take that literally, right? I had a dream recently that was pretty jarring. And the way that I coped with it is that I returned to it after waking up and I changed certain details in it so that I felt like I was not helpless and that I could take action in the storyline in such a way that I could feel healed from the tension that the dream had caused. And that's kind of what we can choose to do with things that are memories as well.
I just want to mention that by you, Mushtaq, saying, what did you say? Something about the whispers of the ghost, or
Yes.
you know, that kind of thing. I understand now the last surah of the Quran in a different light.
There you go.
Which is the Surah An-Nas. Right, this seeking of refuge, and I can read it because it's really
short.
Right,
Because
yes.
it's short and it's to the point.
Please do. I think people will find that helpful.
So it says, Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, قُلْ أَعُوذُ بِرَبِّ النَّاسِ. Say, I seek refuge in the Lord of mankind. Malik al-Nas, the King of mankind. Ilahi al-Nas, the God of mankind. Min sharri al-waswasi al-khannas, from the evil of the sneaking whisperer. الذي يوسوس في صدور الناس, who whispers in the hearts of mankind. من الجنة والناس, of the jinn and of mankind. So it's really interesting because the seeking refuge is in three places: in the Lord, lordship; in kingship, the king of mankind; and in divineness, godness. Right, so seeking refuge in three places: lordship, which is kind of like the body, the lord of, making sure there's sustenance, I'm eating, I'm healthy, my body's taken care of, I have a place over my head. Malik nas, this is the space of the heart. Ilah nas, the God of mankind, which is the space of the spirit. So in all these areas, from body, soul, spirit, from these sneaking whisperer, or kind of the story, the ghost stories that you just mentioned, right? That come in, and sometimes, as it said, from the jinn, which is kind of like ghosts, or from people. My dad telling me something, my mom, my, ex, my boss, whoever, all these stories that come either from people, myself, or these ghosts that may be from the past and whatnot. Yeah, so thank you for that, because really this is, I have a new relationship with it.
Yeah, and that sort of, if you want to do this the Sufi way, that particular sort of would be the one that we would use as our wird, or recitation. You would do it before you started doing your self-observation for your story, as a reminder.
That's beautiful. Yeah, that's beautiful.
So I am going to ask you, Osama, if you would be kind enough to put that sort in the forum in relationship to this talk.
The
Absolutely.
Facebook forum.
Yeah. Absolutely.
Just mentioning for people who are watching,
Yeah.
so they know.
Yeah, the cool kids are all in the Facebook forum.
Something that popped through my head during the last bit that you were talking about, Mushtaq. Does this aspect of the stories and kind of the ghost level thing, is that basically the same as samskaras that you've talked about?
Absolutely. It is very frequently the same as samskaras. A samskara is, I define it as a subliminal memory trace. It's a memory that exists below the level of consciousness most of the time, and yet has an influence on consciousness. It influences your choices and your thoughts and your desires and all of this sort of thing. And part of the work of yoga, real yoga, is to begin to dissolve these samskaras. At least according to Patanjali, and he probably knew about it.
Yeah, and something that just occurred to me now is I'm not familiar enough with yoga to have an opinion about this, but I'd never heard that yoga had anything equivalent to self-observation.
Yeah, that's because in the West, all we have is boutique yoga.
It's exercise,
Yeah,
stretching.
we don't have a whole lot of people teaching real yoga. Real yoga, get a copy of the Yoga Sutras. I recommend Ted Hartsriff. I'll put a link in the forum for it. He has a very good translation, and study it, because it has nothing to do with winding your legs around your neck. It
Yeah,
has
I'm
everything to do with being awake and doing self-observation, self-remembering, um, and all of that cool stuff.
yeah, I'm very familiar with the fact that Hatha yoga, which is what you're talking about with the contortions, is only one of many different kinds of yoga.
Yeah, and I would disagree with that. I would say there is one kind of yoga and a bunch of people who tried to capitalize on that by doing other stuff and calling it yoga. Hatha yoga. I mean, if you read, there's one 15th century text on Hatha yoga, which is not too bad, but mostly it ignores everything about what yoga actually is. This is going to get me off on a rant if I'm not careful.
Well, I totally agree about Hatha yoga, but for example, three of the ones I can remember off the top of my head that I've read about only in passing are Jnana yoga, which is some kind of intellectual yoga, karma yoga, which I believe is talked about in the Gita, and Raj yoga. And I believe there's two or three
Yeah,
others.
could you tell me the difference between those three?
Well, to the
Okay,
ex-
look at
to
what the
the
names mean.
to the limited extent that uh I remember about this, I would say that Jnana yoga is kind of what Gurdjieff might have called the way of the intellectual.
Yeah, but I don't think so. See, throwing
Yeah,
names.
I'm not going to challenge you on that because
Yes.
these are little fragments that I just remember from many decades
Yeah.
ago.
So we look at the names. Raja Yoga. Raja means king, Lord Yoga. And that was a term used for Patanjali's yoga in the Yoga Sutras. Jnana Yoga. Jnana means knowledge, knowing. And that is another name used for the yoga of the Yoga Sutras. Karma Yoga means that you do things to work off what you think your karma is. And then you have Bhakti Yoga, the yoga of
Devotional.
devotion, which is my favorite because that's how the guru gets people to clean his floor. As you can tell, I'm something of a cynic about this. But all of these different names for yoga are marketing ploys. They don't really have anything to do with real yoga, as far as I'm concerned. Opinions may vary. But I can be pretty curmudgeon-y about it. Damn it, you kids, get off my yoga mat.
All
So the
right.
heart of yoga
Yeah.
you can find in the Yoga Sutras more than any place else. After you've read through that, then you can look at the Vijnana Bhairava, which is where Jnana Yoga, the term, comes from. And that is a series of yoga techniques that relate to what Patanjali was teaching. But it's basically one thing, unless you're marketing something. And remember, the Hatha yoga that we have came from Krishnamacharya figuring out how to market Indian calisthenics to English people.
which were to a large extent copied from Scandinavian calisthenics.
So they say. But anyway, I don't want to digress too much because this is a whole different subject that I could talk on for hours and hours and hours and get really worked up about and yell and shake my fist and upset people. And I enjoy that, but it's off topic. Which is not to say that doing Hatha yoga, it's pronounced Hatha, by the way, not Hatha. Hatha yoga, which means forceful. doing forceful yoga has certain benefits. It's a really good way to stretch and strengthen the body without doing a lot of ballistic work if you get good teachers. So there are lots of benefits to it. But
Just
without
don't
the other,
mistake it.
yeah, without the other 7 limbs, it's not yoga.
Where were we?
Sorry.
So, sorry for taking this into a digression.
Oh,
Did
it's
not
okay.
intend that.
He just gets eager.
Curse you for bringing up things that I have passionate feelings about.
Okay, so yeah, we're gonna post about the Yoga Sutras in the forum.
Yeah, the name of the book that I think is the best translation.
in
Did you
English.
know that the
Yes.
first language that the Yoga Sutras were translated from, they were written in Sanskrit, and the first language that they were translated into was Arabic.
That should not be surprising.
Yeah, and yet people are surprised by that. And we have existing copies of it. It's fascinating to see how he translated it and made it acceptable to Muslim countries. Yes, James.
When you say it's translated into Arabic, it was translated from extant Sanskrit texts.
Yes.
Though, do we have
translated in
access
like
to
the
those
8th
original?
Yeah, we have access to original Sanskrit texts of the Yoga Sutras.
And then, okay, so yeah, so the first it's in Sanskrit, we have evidence of that,
Right.
and then the first inter-language translation is Arabic.
Yes.
Right.
Yeah, there's plenty of old Sanskrit text for the Yoga Sutras.
That was just a point of history. I want to make sure I had straight.
And one also memorizes the Yoga Sutras. So you have both going on. So it's hard to lose it. But we digress again.
Back to stories.
Back to stories. Where was I?
We were talking about one thread that we can weave back in is Anissa was saying not identifying with the stories is one way to drain the power away from the
Yes,
stories.
which is absolutely correct.
Yes, and then you did say that the important thing is though to not get caught in this
In the negative.
in the negative. Yes.
Yeah. Yeah, because sitting around trying to not identify with something can lead you down a rabbit hole.
Yep. Yeah. And we've discussed why holding on to these stories can be empowering, even.
Yes.
Which is important.
So, and you will not know which stories are useful and which aren't until you've done a lot of self-observation. Muhasabah. It's why we do that. One of the reasons. All right. Thoughts, questions, more, less. I'm tired of talking. You guys talk for a while.
Okay, I'll say something.
Yeah, sure.
Thank you, Cherie.
Okay. If you want an analogy, it's like what I do in physical work. So someone comes in and says, I'm inflexible. I'm always inflexible. I've never been able to touch my toes. And that could be like your emotional experience that you're carrying around with you and you're repeating it over and over again. So you honestly believe you're inflexible. And so I come along and help them and say, well, maybe if we try this or try this or try this, and they'll only give it one shot. I tried that once, it never worked. Try that once, it never worked. And so I find with a lot of therapies and things that people try, if they're really not observing exactly what they're doing, they just like repeating the same thing over and over again. And there's that attachment. They really actually can't see themselves as anything but inflexible. So they actually don't see how they can move past it, and they don't want to do the work. And it's the same thing with the emotional things. I get myself caught up in the devaluing myself. And I even said it yesterday. I said, sometimes when I'm winning, I actually still feel like a loser what's that? But that's
Yeah.
just the story. The story I tell myself that I'm not of value, that my culture tells me I'm a worthless woman, that I'm a no value daughter, you know, that sort of thing. You know, you think, what the hell is that about? I'm a modern woman. What am I doing that for? Why am I falling into that trap? So when you talk about how to undo this kind of thing, or how you're working to unravel the tightness that we put around our attachment to an affliction, the story is so powerful that we've identified it into it unconsciously. It's like a neural pattern in physical work that we say you're not going to actually feel the benefit of a particular thing until you groove that neural pattern in. You do it again and again and again, and you can feel, oh, there's a little bit of competency that comes with that. And the same with the emotional thing. If I keep saying I'm a worthless girl, then that's all I can see. But I'm not a worthless girl. And so that's a neural pattern that our thoughts can actually create the very thing we don't want. And we're trying to observe when we're catching it, so we can catch it and say, we can put that down now. And we have to do it 1,000 times.
Yeah.
1,000 times again, because it'll come back and bite you when you're tired, or when you're distracted by something else, or something happens to someone that's similar to your experience, and you commiserate and you share the same story over and over again. And that's a danger, you know, so that falling into. So that's what's coming out for me, that don't groove in the very thing that you're trying to observe and analyze and then unravel. Don't groove it in by repeating it over and over again. You are not that thing. You had an experience. Now put it down. You had an experience. Now put that down. And that can be good and bad, because the good ones can sometimes create a vanity that you didn't even realize that you were projecting onto other people. And you think, okay, I can put that down. Not real, not real. So that's what I'm taking out of it, the story. And the funny thing is, this has happened to me last night. We were talking about this with a friend. I was repeating something. He goes, you've been saying that for a year. And I'm going, I am too. So what am I trying to do? And he said, your goal was this. Why have you gone into why it can't happen and blah, 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 blah. And it's just like, oh man, that must be utterly boring listening to me, because I'm saying the same story again, and just in a different way, different angle, still happening, still making me shitty. Okay. I forgot my path. I forgot my own focus, you know, that, okay, I am this person. Where is my true self? Where is remembering me? That this is me. This is where I was going. And then I got distracted by helping someone else, then helping someone else, then helping someone else. I'm no longer in this way. So my neural path went whoop, and I just didn't even realize I was repeating the same story until someone told me I was boring. And I'm going, ooh, that person's right.
Yeah, and that brings up the something that we haven't touched too much on, which is social reinforcement of stories.
Sometimes that's the hardest part.
Yeah, because your social group is usually in agreement on certain fundamental things, and you'll reinforce each other's story about that.
Yeah. Or people like a certain story about you. They're very attached to that. So they keep projecting it onto you over and over, and the jokes they make and the affection they express is all reflective of this story that they hold about you. And at least in my experience, sometimes then I feel obligated to wear that story for them, because that's what they're attached to. And that's part of my training in this culture is, I have to, in order to make the other person happy and feel good, I need to wear this story they're putting on me.
Yeah. And it can be, it's very interesting because it starts with certain social cues. If you're a Muslim and you're in certain parts of the world, every third word out of your mouth is inshallah. I see Osama laughing back there because he knows what I'm talking about. Now, I don't do that. I've been a Muslim since I was 21 years old, so that's a long time ago. But I never got into the habit of saying inshallah every third word because I know that it's if God wills. I'm pretty clear on that. I don't need to remind myself of that. I
Yeah.
don't need to remind anybody else of that. But it makes some of my fellow Muslims look askance at me.
That
He
you
didn't
don't say it. Yeah. Yep.
Yes.
Well, yeah, well, I have a story with that one. Because most of the time, the majority of the time, when people do use that word, it's from a sleeping state,
Yes.
right? So they would say, inshallah, but they're really, God willing, but really they're not saying it from a, from from a waking state, from being present. And even just as a kid, whenever I hear my parents tell me inshallah, I would get mad. I'm like, don't tell me that because that means no. I'd rather you just tell me no instead of telling me God willing.
I've heard
Right.
that before. Yeah.
Yeah. So I used to get so upset when they were like, oh, I want this. Okay, inshallah, God willing. I'm like, no, don't say God willing. I would really get upset. So, but obviously now I know it's because they would say that they don't even not act like not meaning it really
Reflexively.
reflexively, exactly.
Yeah. Mhm.
Yeah, and there's a
Absolutely.
bunch of that sort of thing in every culture.
Yep.
I
So
I
I
see it. Oh, sorry.
okay, Todd, but I also want to make sure that we read Anissa's
Yes.
very, critical remarks. Why don't you go ahead, Todd, and then I'll read both of hers.
I was just saying that I've seen it often as a way of avoiding taking personal responsibility for things, to push it off on, well, in this case, God, or to someone, anything else.
Yeah, it's a little passive aggressive, right? Like, I don't want to take responsibility for disappointing you, so
So God can disappoint you.
yeah.
But
Right.
that's just one example. I mean, when I was a kid, I would hear all the time, I want to do this in a good way.
Oh God, in a good way.
In a
Yeah.
good way. And that is a native phrase. And it means certain things within the culture that it doesn't mean outside the culture. And if you know what it means, then you're part of that story. If you don't know what it means, it just sounds like something that people say over and over. So,
All right. I would like to read Anissa's.
read Anissa's stuff.
Yeah.
She's waiting patiently to be.
Yeah. Okay. She says one way to look at it is that it's digesting the stories that we tell ourselves and decomposing them and analyzing the core purpose. I feel like that's how you get to know which ones are the right ones for our growth.
Yeah, and you're not wrong. That's actually a good analogy.
Yeah, I like that.
Yeah.
And she continues by saying, and we also tend to be lazy and always want to put ourselves into these labels that the world creates for us or we create for ourselves. And acknowledging that makes us realize that we can, in fact, take a step back and just observe them as tools to navigate in the world I'm not sure if this makes sense. She says, yeah, it does. It does. It absolutely does.
Yeah.
And I love the metaphor of digesting and decomposing, because essentially we're trying to find what has been nutritious in this story. Where is the value in it that is perhaps the reason why I've been holding on to this story? And if it's not there, then it's definitely time to put that in the archive. Not to kill it, but put it in the archive.
Yeah. And imagine what it would be like if you had whole blocks of your day when you didn't tell yourself a story, where the internal dialogue was just quiet and there was no need for reinforcement. Who have we not heard from? Onur.
I would like to see if Whitney might like to chat, or Ibrahim. No pressure, but I figured I would encourage you guys.
Don't everybody jump in all at once either.
I can jump
Whitney.
in.
Yeah, please.
Yeah. I think the way that I've approached this, or the way that it's spoken of, is that we sing songs. So we have these songs that we sing that we are on repeat. And so, you know, we have our sad songs that are on repeat that we sing, or, you know, maybe we have these like uplifting songs that we sing. So when I first started noticing my sad songs, I'm like, oh, this is like one of my catchphrases. I say this all the time. Like, I don't have enough time. There's so much I have to do. I don't have enough time to do it. And that would almost like overload my system to where I couldn't get very much done. And so when I stopped with that sad song or unuseful song, and just kind of focused on doing one thing at a time, I could get so much done, because I didn't have that, you know, my sad song blocking me from doing the thing I needed to be really overwhelmed. Instead, I just could kind of do what I needed to do, one step at a time. Do the next thing was my motto. So my new song was do the next thing.
That's a great song. Beautiful.
The other thing, and it goes to what Anissa said too, and I was thinking about these things that get stuck, and I like the idea of it being like in the realm of spirits, the realm of ghosts, of being like impressions that you're not able to digest, that get stuck and lodged inside of you, that you they might be on repeat, they play themselves out in really really weird ways, but they're impressions that you've not been able to digest in a healthy way. So I appreciated her saying, because I wrote it down here, about improperly, if not even digested impressions, because they've landed in a weird place where you can't get them down, get them through to be put in the archive. So yeah, just that whole wondering of like, okay, how do I digest something like this? Is it something heavy, something dark? Like, how does one change the story or add something to the story to help digest that so it's not stuck?
Yeah. And I think sometimes that's where help comes in too. So there's a lot that we can do on our own, of course, through self observation and self-remembering, but it's also important to realize when we're stuck and that perhaps we need help.
Yeah, and I love using the metaphor of song. That goes back to what I touched on at the beginning of this talk with my Navajo friends and their healers, because it's all song.
Yeah.
They do it. Yeah, and it's literally song at points within their healing ceremonies, where they sing their creation myth as if it were the person who they're healing going through the story, which is interesting. So yay for songs.
Yeah, one of the things that pops into my mind when Whitney was talking about that is that on a cultural level, um, songs can really sort of become that for large groups of people. I mean, at one extreme, it's like you get national anthems. And coming from England, and I see sort of in American sports how they always sing. I guess it's the Star Spangled Banner at the start of
Yep.
a game, and it's like I don't think we do that in England with the national anthem.
Yeah,
It just
not unless you guys win something at
Win the sports ball game? Is that how it works?
no, I think it's like the Olympics. They'll play the English national.
Oh well, yeah. At the Olympics, they'll play anybody's national anthem for the winners, but we don't do it for regular football games.
Mm.
And I mean real football as opposed to what you call it.
Yeah, we need a really honest national anthem. You know, we're the best. We're going to kick your asses. You all suck. Better. Because that's what a lot of national anthems are.
Yeah, but then again, on the other side, there's going back to the 60s. There's all the sort of folk anthems like what Joan Baez and
Yeah.
them, and those were kind of helped to define a movement.
Yep. And they were all stories too. I mean, one of the greatest of the stories of the 60s for working against the war was Alice's Restaurant, the Alice's Restaurant Massacre.
Yeah, I think everybody I knew in England at the time who played guitar learned how to play that.
Yeah, and then there's the Swedish national anthem, which basically revolves around, look at how pretty our country is. But we digress.
Yep.
Ibrahim, do you have any thoughts to share with us? We would love to hear them.
Many thoughts came up for me. I'm still kind of processing some of this. But two things that are almost like right in front of me somewhere here to kind of analyze is I I get I can understand that the stories we tell ourselves creates our lives. So one thing that's been coming up for me is, who am I without my stories?
Really excellent question.
The second thing that comes up for me is, on the surface level, which is almost like this just waking state, quote unquote, of my own reality, is also kind of what's coming up is checking my own privileges in saying a statement like that, because my mind and my empathy and my heart automatically goes to, if that statement is valid, the stories we create ourselves are true, from a cultural context, there could be this oversimplification from my sight of saying something like that. When I look at societies of severe oppression, of war, and a lot of that, so it's like seeing the weight. It's beautiful that you, Mushtaq, you mentioned the February Man.
Mm-hmm.
The level that, I mean, it's making me examining. I mean, one thing in that statement is just cleaning up, like cleaning myself up, because I can see that for my own life, the narratives that I tell myself can do a lot of damage as a person that has a family, friends around me. So to ensure that I clean up my narratives to the best of my conscious ability, to do no harm and make this world a little bit more of a greener place with what I have in power. So it's not fully complete, but I'm certainly going to journal after this call, because a lot of things have been really felt for me.
Cool.
Thank you so much, Ibrahim. And you mentioned something else, like the fact that our stories don't just affect us. They affect those around us as well. Everyone, everything that we come into contact with experiences the ripple effects of the stories that we're telling within. And what do we want those stories to be? To the extent that we have the agency to intentionally tell stories, what do we want those stories to be?
I have this story that it's it's not just me. It's not just the things that have happened to me in my lifetime that I suffer from, but that there are these collective sufferings, whether it be from my ancestors or just humanity as a whole. It's not just my lifetime that I'm suffering from. It's the collective. And then the other story that kind of goes along with that, that I've said since I was little, and I remember being middle school, high school era, saying that we suffer from the sins of our fathers, and I was convinced of this. And then so my story is that whatever I do to heal myself not only heals me, but it heals my ancestors, it heals humanity on a collective scale. It ripples out. So I mean, it's like no pressure, but at the same time, like it's much more than just me. It's all of us. So I feel like that's a story that kind of can carry me out of dark places because I'm not here alone.
Yeah. For me, that question of ancestral trauma, historical trauma, and such is a real thing. And when I was young, I definitely caught a bunch of that because you hear it incessantly. And what I did finally was transform it from ancestral trauma to these are the things that I can learn from my ancestors, and I don't have to own any of them. They aren't mine, they're theirs, but I can learn from it. That worked for me.
Yeah, I think that's a piece, right? Crafting a story that is relevant to and effective for your own being.
Yeah,
Sorry, go ahead, Ian.
I was just going to say, I had an experience in 1996 where I really somehow saw, I don't know quite how to explain it, how everything was going back through the centuries and coming back down. And I really relate to what you were saying about that. I've not had anything like that experience since, but it's something that I regularly think about. And I know exactly what you mean.
Yeah. So, and
Thanks, Ian.
yeah, Anissa posted something else that you might want to read, Nora.
Sure. Anissa is speaking in response to Ibrahim. And one thing that Ibrahim brought up, the question, who am I without those stories, is again trying to put ourselves into these narratives. And at least from my perspective, I just like to think of it like the idea of the divine that we usually describe as outside the scope of language, so to say. Obviously, it's a mystery, like most things in this universe, but keeping that open and not defining it helps with not identifying with it as such. Yeah, it's okay. We understand that sometimes we have to be considerate of the people around us, and
Yeah,
I think it's awesome that you are able to be with us no matter what.
yeah, we have no complaints.
Yeah. Um yeah, I one idea that's coming up for me, which kind of ties in what Mushtaq was saying and what a couple other people have said, is that stories should be like medicine, but they should not be our sustenance entirely.
Yeah. The thing about medicine is the poison is in the dosage. At one dosage, medicine will heal you. At a greater dosage, it'll kill you. Funny how that works. So the right story at the right time can be transformative. The wrong story every damn day will ruin your life.
Yep. And for those of us who want to get beyond story, there's that too.
Yeah, and that is the ultimate thing here. The question of who am I without my stories? And I didn't want to emphasize that too much because it's so scary to people. It's very, very scary, and we don't want to frighten. Well, you guys here, you're going to be fine with it, but a lot of people watching might be upset. So, who are you without your story? If your stories all stopped right now, who would you be? Thoughts, questions, answers?
A clear witness.
Just laughing Al is just funny. I'm sorry, James.
Laugh.
Yeah, if I get a laugh, I take that as a good thing.
Hey, Osama, you have to tell us why you're laughing. This is not fair. Stop being a tease.
I don't know. I don't know.
And you don't have to.
Yeah.
I mean, maybe that's the thing. Maybe that's exactly what's there behind the stories. It's just exactly what you're experiencing. Who knows?
Ibrahim,
There's moments I've laughed because I've seen how silly and pointless my story is. Like, what?
Yeah.
Unfortunately, it happened in public, so I have to keep it under the breath.
all right, we have
kind of, oh, I'm sorry.
I was just going to say we have time for Ibrahim's question, and then we probably need to get out of here.
Nancy, did you have something you wanted to share though? Or were you
Yeah,
just
I was
unmuted?
thinking about the. Oh, right.
Yeah.
Excuse me.
Nancy and then Ibrahim, and then we will.
Oh, then we'll wrap it
say
up.
goodbye. Yeah.
Ibrahim gets the last.
Oh, I was thinking that to the extent that stories are self-limiting, that um being without your stories would mean being able to use your whole self or being your whole self. That doesn't mean you can do everything, but it means that you're able to do what you can do.
I think that that's accurate.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. In fact, this is also storytelling, but I noticed a little bit of fear coming up when I thought about what would be possible. Who would I be if I didn't have my stories? And it was like, ooh, that seems overwhelming and dangerous. But these are the kind of constraints we put on ourselves in order to perhaps feel safe, to feel managed.
Oh yeah, I'm being rather theoretical about this. I don't have the nerve to go that route yet myself, I think.
Whenever it's time, it'll be
Yeah.
time. Thanks, Nancy.
Welcome.
Ibrahim,
The only thing I was actually, it wasn't a question, it was just kind of adding to the laughter of Osama and me laughing as well. Do not quote me on this book, but many of you probably all read it or heard of it. I think by maybe Ramana Maharishi's book, Who Am I? And it basically is like a 16-page book or like 20-page book. And it's basically telling you everything paradoxically that I'm not. And that's the way of kind of knowing who I am, which I don't know if they ever figured it out. So I'm not this microphone. I'm not this computer. I'm not this vest. I'm not this eyebrow. So there's I guess, paradoxical humor in this level too.
Yep. That too. Not this, but wherever we can just kind of get creative with it in that way. It's going to teach us something. Yeah. Yep. Anissa says differentiation. Not sure exactly what you're saying there, but maybe you can retype it. And then Cherie says, my current conflicts are coming from not fitting with other people's stories for me. Ugh. I feel ya, Cherie. I feel ya. Yeah. All right. Differentiation. Yeah, we bring Hegel to the table. Yep. All right. Thank you so much, everyone. Hopefully you've got some things to start thinking about in terms of the stories that you are yammering at yourself in the background all the time. Yes.
And as usual, it's wonderful hanging out with all of you.
Yeah. And
Don't let it
James,
go to your head, but we like you guys.
Yep, we choose to hang out with you every week. James says, stories have stood between me and my intentions. When they drop, an effortless focus and follow through. An effortless focus and follow through. God willing, inshallah, right? All right, everyone. So we are not going to be around next week. We're actually like taking a vacation, quote unquote, which is amazing. And
Yeah, it didn't start out as a vacation, but it turned into one.
yeah,
We
I
were
was
going to a wedding, but the groom got trapped in Bangladesh
with COVID.
with COVID. So no wedding, but we have a week in LA, so we're going to take it.
Yeah. Yep. So take good care, and we'll see you in 2 weeks.
And if not before, you never know.
Yeah. Maybe we'll pop in with some random video blog or some garbage like that. Okay.
Happen. Take care, folks.
Wave, everybody. See ya. Bye.